really full and it's really warm in here. Can everyone try to find a seat so we can get started? Yeah, raise your hand if there's an empty seat at your table. Hello, everybody. Stop talking and get a seat. All right. There's an empty seat at the tables where someone has their hand raised. And then we also have chairs over here. Ken Bowers and Mitchell Silver will welcome you and give a presentation, and following that, if you're sitting here and need a table, we'll have another table set up so that you can have your time to have the group discussion. One other question I have. At your table, if you do not have a facilitator and a note taker, would someone raise their hand? What do you need? You do not have a facilitator. We're hoping that the topic experts wouldn't mind filling in as facilitators or note takers. So if you raise your hand and you're missing a note taker or facilitator, could someone have a seat with that table? Welcome. We're going to start the presentation now with Mitchell Silver, the Director of Planning for the Department of City Planning, welcoming you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all for coming out to our new code meeting. You are here for the new code, right? Oh, Capital Boulevard. You know, we had 2 meetings this week on the zoning code, and we would really appreciate it if a crowd this large could come out, but that's another story for another time. But this is Capital Boulevard. Well, before I get started, first let me acknowledge that we have at least 2 elected officials here. I know Dr. West is here. We have Russ Stevenson. Any other elected officials out there in the room? Well, let me just first say I am overwhelmed by the showing here tonight. And before we get started, I want to thank Bobby Murray Chevrolet for opening up this facility for us to have this meeting. This looks a lot of tables, a lot of chairs, so please let's give them a round of applause for opening up this venue. And please don't forget, there is a spring event. I'm told every car is on sale. So if you parked really far away, look at some of the nice cars on the way back, or trucks. I'm sure they're going to stick around and are willing to make a deal before you leave today. Now let's get into this meeting. As you can see in this room, this project is really, really exciting. It gets everybody juices flowing. This is not the first time Capital Boulevard had been looked at many, many times in the past. But as you know, we adopted a comprehensive plan back in 2009. We want to thank the council for unanimously adopting that plan, but that was a general plan. That was a blueprint. And now it's time to do specific plans as we look at neighborhoods and corridors. And I can tell you throughout the comprehensive plan process, in almost every meeting, the #1 area people said, please fix, was Capital Boulevard. And so I think your showing here tonight highlights that point. And yes, people say, why did you stop at the Beltline? You should keep going straight north. We'll talk about that in the future. But there's no question that Capital Boulevard connecting downtown to Midtown really represents one of the incredible opportunities and visioning for a city that, as you heard, we now just surpassed 400,000 people, and now we're the 45th largest city. Now, it's not about quantity, it's about quality, and I think the reason why people are so surprised is that both the council and everyone involved make sure that as we grow, it's a quality city, and so you just don't feel that there are 400,000 people here. So I'm not going to go on much further. I'm going to introduce Ken, but I do want to acknowledge, which I hope Ken acknowledges, we do have an intern from Paris, and I'm sure they do a lot of work on boulevards such as Champs-Élysées and other places. So you'll probably hear a little bit more about Oriane if you just stand up for a second. She's going to be with us for a few more weeks, but did a lot of work on the research and the graphics. So please give her a round of applause. And I thank you, and now I'm going to turn it over to Ken to go over this presentation and talk about some of the other logistics. Thank you.
Thanks, and welcome. My goodness, wasn't expecting, we expected a reasonable turnout, but wasn't expecting such a large number of people to come out for a road. Before I get started, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping. First order of business is that there's some paper that you were handed when you came in, and one of those is a registration form which you can fill out so that we have all of your information. We probably already have it if you pre-registered, but if you didn't register, please give us some contact information, at least an email, so we can send you updates. Oh, sorry. So we can send you updates on the project as it goes on if you provide us with a phone number or an email address or a mailing address. There's a summary sheet of the scope of work, which I'm going to present to you tonight, that gives an outline of the different tasks involved in the study. There's a comment form that has 4 questions on it. Your facilitators will be walking you through these questions tonight. If you want to put something else that you didn't get a chance to say, you can write it on this and leave it with us, and we'll compile all of those notes. And then the last one is a workshop evaluation where you can write, tell us how you thought the meeting went, and obviously one of the things you might say is that we should have gotten a bigger room. But fill this out and it'll help us plan for better meetings in the future. So with that, I'm going to go through a brief presentation. You've already been welcomed. I'm going to talk about the rationale for the project study area and quickly go through the scope of work for the project. That's the list of tasks that we're going to be doing between now and the end of the project about a year from now. I'm going to give a historic overview. We wanted to understand how the existing condition came to be, and our intern, Oriane, did a lot of digging through the archives, through old newspaper articles, through old maps, and sort of reconstructed the history from before Capital Boulevard existed and how it was built, so we could sort of understand how this existing condition came to be. I'm going to go over some of the major issues, and then after we do that, it's going to be the group discussions. This is a kickoff meeting, and the purpose of it is to make sure that we're starting the project in the right direction. So it's a confirmation that the scope is covering all of the relevant topics, that we've identified the issues that we need to study, that everyone is in agreement and is comfortable with the proposed study area, and if not, if there are some suggestions for modifying it, we'd like to hear them. And then based on these results, we'll finalize the scope, which is still a draft, we'll finalize the study area, and then we can be confident as we launch on our work that we're in the right direction. So that's really what this meeting is all about. It's a time to generate a lot of general ideas and identify all the issues. Later in the project, we're going to have a much more intensive design workshop to really start to get into the weeds, and I'll talk about that as part of the scope. So first, the study area. The study area is basically Capital Boulevard from where it starts, where McDowell and Dawson Street merge, going north to the 440 belt line. And it's the area constrained by the rail lines. We have 2 rail lines on either side of it that are big defining physical features. And in the southern part, basically south of Atlantic Avenue and Wake Forest Road, that's pretty constrained, and then the railroads cross each other and they sort of branch out, and so the study area gets larger. And so the railroad continues to be the end over here on the western side, and then the eastern side is basically all the non-residentially zoned property that's in all the commercial property that's along the corridor. We didn't include any of the residential neighborhoods as part of the study area. The first phase is to scope out the project, and we've actually already been doing some work before this meeting. One of the things we've done is we've met internally with all the different departments, and I have an intergovernmental or interdepartmental working group with Public Works, Transportation, Stormwater, Parks and Greenways, everyone who has some expertise or knowledge or a stake in this project. We got them together and we did some internal brainstorming. Then the next thing we did was we met with the state government folks and the county, and primarily the water quality people and the Department of Transportation, and make sure that we understand what their issues are. And then the third thing we did was we prepared these briefing booklets, which are on your table, that contain some information and maps that will be useful for you during this meeting tonight, and it's also available as a download on the web. And then the last thing we're doing is having this meeting tonight. And so when this meeting is done and we have totaled up all the results and made any amendments we need to make, then this phase of the project is over. Then the next phase is to do all the detailed information gathering, that's an inventory and analysis. And so while everyone else is at the beach, we'll be hard at work compiling tons of maps and lots of data, all the traffic counts, all the information that we can get in the study area, and then writing it up in a report. And the report's going to talk about issues, opportunities, and constraints, similar to what you're talking about tonight, but in more detail. And the purpose of that report is so that when we go and do a design workshop, we really know what we're talking about. And the end of that is going to be a major design workshop, which could be 1.5 to a 2-day undertaking, where you'll be at tables like this with lots of maps and markers, and we'll start generating a whole lot of ideas and solutions now that we have enough information to appropriately frame the problem. I don't have a firm schedule, but it's probably going to happen in October. Part of this analysis, by the way, is that we are going to look at all the past plans, the most recent ones having been the Bicentennial Boulevard plan that was done in the late 80s and implemented in the early 90s, which led to a lot of the beautification efforts that are still out there today, all the crepe myrtles and other trees that were planted, and the adoption of sign ordinance controls. And also the Big Ideas book that we put together, Capital Boulevard was a big part of that. The phase 3 part of the project is based on the design workshop, is to start distilling all these different ideas, testing them to make sure they're feasible, and putting them into packages of options. And those options may be all the short-term stuff, all the medium-term stuff, and all the long-term stuff, or we might organize them by how significant they are in terms of cost. You know, so here's the minor interventions and here's the major interventions. But it's basically to package them together as things that can be implemented in a phased manner. We want to have solutions that are proportionate to the problem that's trying to be solved, but we also need to be realistic and make sure that they are physically feasible and something that we think that we can get funding for to carry forward. Because the purpose of this plan is to actually do things, not just to come up with some cool ideas. And then the last part of that is going to generate a report. That report will go to the city council. They will vote on it. Part of that may also involve some amendments to the citywide comprehensive plan. And we expect a lot of follow-up studies, engineering studies, design work to come out of this when we're actually ready to start taking the project ideas and designing them and getting them ready to be fundable projects.
We still having a problem hearing you in the back.
Can you hold this?
Okay. I'll turn it up. Feedback. Is that better? Can you hear that now? Is that loud enough? Throughout this process, we have what we're calling the outreach and in-reach strategy. That's probably too loud. The outreach strategy is meetings like this that we're going to hold at regular intervals with the public. The in-reach strategy is all this coordination that has to happen between the different governmental entities. I mean, this is a state road, it's a federal highway. A lot of the stuff that would have to do with the stream that runs through at the Pigeon House branch, you know, we have to work with the Division of Water Quality. Both the state, county, and city are all property owners in the area. So there's a lot of coordination, and that's what we're calling the in-reach strategy. We're also lucky to have, because of the interest the project has generated, 3 consulting firms that have volunteered pro bono services. This was conceived of as an entirely staff-led effort because with the current fiscal situation, we didn't have a lot of money to throw around at it. But fortunately, we have 3 top-flight design engineering firms that are going to provide technical expertise and services for us. And they are Kimley Horn, have a major office here in Raleigh and another one in Cary. They do a lot of transportation work, roadway design, site and civil engineering. We have Camp Dresser McKee, or CDM. They're here. They're also a full-service engineering firm, but they have a lot of expertise in wastewater systems, and water quality engineering. And then lastly, we have DHM Design. They've recently opened an office here in Raleigh. Their main headquarters in Denver, and they're a landscape architecture and design firm and urban design firm that's done a lot of work on river recapture and streamfront restoration. If the pro bono folks could raise their hand just so everyone can see who you are. it's been great to have their participation. And then the project timeline, probably no one can see this because the screen's not big enough, but it's about a year and we're 2 months into it. So we're hoping to deliver that final report in April of 2011. So if you look back at an aerial photograph of this area before Capital Boulevard was built, where we're standing was basically undeveloped, and it was an area of rolling fields and woodlands and pure, pristine waters and things of that nature. And there was this meandering stream that we called the Pigeon House Branch that flowed from downtown. It actually starts in Cameron Park and kind of flows through the Glenwood South area and then north along Capital Boulevard. It is up in the Crabtree Creek, and then on the north side you had the Crabtree Creek coming through here. And this was all, you know, open land and farmland and estates. It was an obvious place to put a road at the time because we needed a new major connection, north-south connection, and this was really the only place to put it. And the first leg of it opened from downtown up to Fairview Road in the late 50s. And at the time, it was seen as a great way to start setting the stage for the industrial development of Raleigh. This was an area that had rail access, and now we were providing the road access. And in fact, the next major thing that happened up here after it was open was that there was a lot of industrial expansion, and we still see a lot of that all around us today, a lot of industrial buildings. In fact, Willie York, in addition to developing Cameron Village, one of his major development projects was to develop an industrial park up in this area between what's now Atlantic Avenue and Capital Boulevard. The Fairview Avenue interchange was actually originally an at-grade intersection that was added in 1961 to deal with unsafe conditions there. And then by 1970, when the road, you know, and also about this time, the road had been extended up to what we now know as US 1. This was the old Lewisburg Road. And by 1970, this had been proclaimed the busiest stretch of highway in the state. We had surpassed what's now Interstate 40 in Winston-Salem by carrying 56,500 cars a day. And there was an article in the News and Observer that year that this was the busiest highway in all of North Carolina. 1980, basically the last piece of the puzzle for the road system was the completion of Atlantic Avenue and bridging over the railroad tracks and connecting through all this. And then 1989, there was a thought that this area really needed an aesthetic improvement, and which was true. And the Bicentennial Boulevard project was done, and it was basically, you know, it was a very nicely done plan. It was a lot of landscaping, and we planted a lot of trees. And the other key part of it was the signs and billboards were out of control, and so we passed an ordinance to get that stuff under control. And as a result, if you go, it looks a lot better than it did before this was done. But it wasn't a big transformative change in the way the roadway was designed or functioned, and it didn't really change very much the land uses along it. So it was a very beneficial thing that happened, but we're hoping to take this a little bit step farther. And so the present day, the area is now largely developed. There's a fairly established land use pattern pretty much everywhere except up here, where we just recently started getting a lot of residential development occurring. And that's the departure point. So with that history, I'd like to now go through what some of the major issues are. And this is obviously a major highway, so I'll start with traffic. It's a little bit hard to see this map, but you can think of the roadway as having three major segments. There's the area north of Wake Forest Road between 440 and Wake Forest Road. There's the area between Wake Forest Road and Wade Avenue, and then the area south of Wade Avenue. The very busiest stretch of road, which in our most recent count carries 60,000 cars, is the area south of Wade Avenue. It drops off a little bit north of there, and then north of Wake Forest Road, it drops off a lot. So actually, where we're standing is the most lightly traveled part of this whole corridor. And you pick up a lot of traffic from Wake Forest Road, and you pick up a lot over here. Interestingly, though, we looked at the official DOT counts in this area going back to the 1960s, and the largest count ever recorded was in 1974. That's what this peak is here, and basically the trend has been fairly flat ever since then. So although this road carries a lot of traffic, it actually doesn't carry quite as much traffic as it did in 1974, and it's essentially been unchanged in terms of growth in all that time period. Another key part of the traffic thing is access management. Parts of this road are sort of designed to work like a freeway, and other parts have a lot of stoplights, some parts have a lot of curb cuts, and it creates some unsafe conditions. So one of the things, if we want to improve traffic flow, is to deal with access management. The other issue of access, though, is a lot of the land uses don't have good access, because if you get off to go to something on one side of the road, it's very difficult to get back to where you came from. And so coming up with new local alternatives that allow people to get to businesses along Capital Boulevard without necessarily having to be on Capital Boulevard should be an important part of this. We have, in some areas along here, the beginnings of an access road system. One of the things we want to look at is there a way to start tying that together into a more complete access road system that isn't so fragmented. Rail and bus transit. The number 1 bus, which runs from Wake Forest Road and then up this section of Capitol, is the second most productive route in the city's bus system today, and I think it has the highest total ridership. Unfortunately, the conditions for the bus rider in terms of presence of sidewalks and good bus stops are not very good in this part of the study area. And then these 2 rail lines are all being targeted for different types of services. The major one is the Triangle Transit Regional Rail Service, which would run along here, and that's definitely going to impact the corridor. And there's been talk of stops at the north end near 440 and another one near Whitaker Mill Road, which are going to be studied in the latest alternatives analysis by Triangle Transit. Another key rail investment is Southeast High-Speed Rail, and that is a high-speed passenger train coming from Washington, D.C., going through Raleigh and then on to Charlotte. And as it approaches downtown, the current studies call for it to either be here or on the other side of Capital Boulevard, and there's trade-offs with both of those. But whichever it is going to have an impact on the study area, especially because both of these propose closing some roads that have at-grade rail crossings for safety reasons. And then pedestrians and cyclists are a major issue, because we don't really have very good facilities for either. The sidewalk network is okay in the southern end, but it's pretty non-existent up in the northern end of the study area, and the bike facilities are pretty much completely non-existent throughout the study area. So if you are a cyclist, it's pretty hard to access the land uses that are here. And then land use and zoning is a major one. Almost the entire study area is zoned for heavy industry, because that was the original thinking about how this was going to be developed. It was warehouses and distribution and manufacturing that was along the rail lines and took advantage of the new highway access. But there's a lot of that industrial land use is not in high demand anymore, because industry has tended to move to further out sites with more space. And so as a result, there's a need to rethink these zoning patterns, and is industrial the right zoning for this whole study area when we have lots of other types of uses coming in, including residential. Water quality is a major thing. The Pigeon House branch has been rerouted and channelized. It's got about 15 culverts that it passes through from downtown to Crabtree Creek. And because of the amount of pavement in the study area, it has a lot of problems with flash flooding, because when it rains and you get a really heavy rain, a lot of water goes in there at once, and then you get things like this. I don't know if you can see this. This is the Capitol Inn, and the river has come out of its banks, and this is actually just from 2003. And so this is a condition that you can expect to happen when a major tropical storm comes through, or even a really intense thundercell comes through and drops a lot of rain in a short period of time, because of the amount of pavement and impervious surface and lack of stormwater control we have in the area. There's a lot of public land here that we need to have a plan for. The city owns a large site in the southern end. You may have heard of it. It's called Devereaux Meadows, based on the old ballpark that used to be there. And eventually, the thinking is that the city will move its facilities out of there. Our solid waste services has their facility there, and our vehicle fleet has a facility there. And with the new remote operations center, that stuff could move out, and then that land could be available for something else. The Department of Corrections owns a large site that used to be the farmers market up in the crook of the Crabtree Creek here, just west of Capital Boulevard, and then the county owns some land in the southern part of the study area as well. Greenways may seem like a funny idea for Capital Boulevard, but there's been a long-standing plan to bring a greenway connector from the existing greenway on the Crabtree Creek, which is a beautiful thing if you've ever been up there. Wonderful boardwalk through this wetland that runs in this area here. Down here, our chief greenway planner, Vic Lepsock, at the organizational meeting for the staff, told me that it was It was his legacy to the city and life's work to figure out how to make this happen, before he retires. So we're going to try to make sure that he doesn't retire without having figured out how this is going to work. So we're going to try to figure out some way to thread a greenway through this area to make that connection. And then a big part of this is the notion that with the change in land use, with the industrial buildings turning over and needing to find new uses, that there's a really big opportunity to start rethinking the land use pattern here. And if we can just make the right investments to create the type of environment, there's an enormous potential upside to set the stage for new private investment in this area. That may be retail, it may be commercial, it may be residential, it may be some mix of those things. And that's one of the things that we'll be studying as to what that appropriate mix might be. But we see that as potential. We have two pictures. Here's a sort of retail flex building that is a relatively new building that was developed just across the street here. And this is some new apartment development that happened just off of Atlantic Avenue. But long term, there's a lot of potential here if we can match public investment with private investment. So that concludes my presentation of the major issues. And from this, we're going to go into the table discussions. And the discussion is basically organized around three topics: issues, opportunities, and constraints. And as I said, it's intended to inform the research program and the work that we're going to do in phase 2. So, but the first thing is, having had a chance to see the scope presented to you and the task that we're undertaking and what the study area is are you in agreement that that's logical, or does it make sense? Or is there some modification? The second thing is, have we missed any issues? Is there an issue that's important to you, or you think that we haven't really covered, or that you'd like to elaborate upon as part of this effort? Then the third question, thinking a little bit more abstractly and creatively, what are the opportunities here? What do you see as being the major opportunities for positive change within the study area? And then once you've identified what those opportunities are, what are the barriers, the constraints that are standing in the way of realizing those opportunities? So it's a fairly simple 4-part exercise, and I hope it would be very useful. Before we get to it, I did want to do one thing that I meant to do at the beginning, but I forgot to do, which is get a sense of kind of who's in the room. Of people in the room, how many people own property within the study area? So we have good representation of folks who directly own property in the study area. How many people operate or own a business in the study area? Okay, somewhat fewer. And how many people are just residents who live in the general area and otherwise have an interest? So a lot of residents here. So that's really good to see. And I'm sure there's some overlap within those three categories. Okay, with that, my presentation is done. I'll be floating around. If there's specific questions, you can come and ask them to me. We have lots of other subject matter experts here. There'll be other people floating around. If you have a question you need answered, there's a little flag on your table, and you can wave it. One other quick thing is, if you don't have a map, unfortunately we're a little oversubscribed, but we have this aerial photograph. We have a couple other maps that we could use to sketch, so we'll take those down from the stands and get you a map. Is there any other pressing question before we start? In the back? I'm sorry. Oh. Yeah. We'll take this one question before we get started. The question was, why does the study area stop at 440? There's a couple of reasons. One of which is our resources are limited, and so this is already an extremely large study area, and to make it larger would make the study significantly more complex. The second reason is that we felt like the issues inside 440 were in many ways of a different character than the issues north of 440. A big part of this is what to do with the Pigeon House Branch water body. That's all within 440. There's not a similar water condition outside of it. The traffic volumes are higher north of 440 than they are inside the Beltline. I think the third question is, why did we prioritize this? And it's simply because, as part of the comprehensive plan process and what we heard folks really focused on this area. This doesn't mean we're going to neglect the area to the north, and in fact, the last corridor study we did was Capital north of 540, which has led to that being repurposed as a more limited access freeway. But this was the priority that fell out of the comp plan process. It was, I think, as large an area as we could bite off in one chance, and rest assured, we'll be looking at the other areas in the future. Okay, thanks. We've set up one additional table in the back, so if you have not been able to find a seat at the table, I believe there are some seats open back here behind the screen. Yes.
There's a table here, and then we're going to move some people over there if they want to follow me.
Okay, we're also going to move some other people to another area, so if you haven't been able to get a seat at the table, please come to the front of the room. If you want to participate in a discussion, see this lady right here. Also, if you're dying with thirst, there's water and sodas and ice cold and some coolers over here just around the corner.
maybe now he's starting to. I think he wants to give people as long as possible. But it's 8 o'clock. Oh, all right. So I'm going to start back there.
Okay. Well, it's amazing. People just can't stop talking about Capital Boulevard. Sorry to have to call time, but we've got a lot of tables. There were so many people out tonight that if we don't get the report out underway, we won't be able to get it done. I'd like to invite the folks who are in the very back maybe to come back out when you can and join us. Tricia is in the back with a mobile microphone, and she's going to start in the back of the room and go to each table individually, and hopefully you've now selected someone who's going to talk into that microphone and tell us what your top issue, your top opportunity, and your top constraint was. So, Tricia, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Good.
All right, first group. We're going to follow our instructions here and be brief. The biggest issue that we have talked about was appearance of some of the properties, how worn and older some of them are, and we want to do something to encourage redevelopment of those properties. Our biggest opportunity for the area, we believe, is transit, specifically the rail. The biggest constraint that we see is, we talked about two, I think money, and that goes without saying, but really the one that's a little more interesting is the distance you have between the two rail lines is pretty narrow to get in enough developable property and the amenities that we're talking about building in the facility.
Sir.
Our number one issue we identified. Our number one issue we identified is that there's no really first step catalyst to get the project started at this point. And we were just talking a lot about what needs to come first to bring the rest of the potential solutions. Constraint we talked about is the current zoning and master planning in the area and helping to better define that, especially to promote and get over some of the economic challenges to promoting small business growth. And then the opportunity that we identified was creating a pedestrian-friendly boulevard with adjacent green infrastructure.
We are going along on the same lines here. We have two top issues. One was circulation, and that's not only pedestrian, but vehicular traffic as well, and possibly a crossover for pedestrian bridges or something like that, because you can't get from one side to the other of Capitol. And the second goes along with everybody else, the aesthetic values with the warehouses and the other stores. You all know what I mean. Top constraints are the current zoning and the amount of traffic. There's no way to divert traffic around Capital Boulevard, such as opening up Atlantic or Raleigh. And some big opportunities are increasing recreational values around here through greenways or ballparks or something like that. And a really big opportunity is to do something about flooding control like they're doing in San Antonio and they've done in Richmond, to divert water and set up locks and dams and things like that.
We sort of viewed our constraints as opportunities. Our biggest constraints in our discussion became the barriers that the rail line set up that flank Capital Boulevard, and that in essence what that's doing is carving a big scar right through two really good neighborhoods, and that maybe the opportunity there is to preserve traffic movement in and out of town, but at the same time allow for pedestrian connectivity across Capital Boulevard through tunnels or bridges, and then activating that central space between the rails with mixed-use development, cultural amenities like ballparks, parks, waterways, things like that. And one of the constraints obviously also being cost, but that goes without saying. And an opportunity along those lines would also be to capitalize on the waterway that exists there and invigorate that and make it an amenity to the neighborhood.
This group identified a lot of issues, and I think key was more tying the existing land uses with some of the aesthetic improvements and possibilities. In current conditions was an issue somewhat. It's a little vague on that one. Also touched on administrative controls and possibilities of how those administrative controls might be able to be administered in that corridor to improve the situation there currently. Best opportunity for positive change, the key we discussed was the multi-layered transportation system and linking that directly to land use, and how the greenways, multimodal, light rail created nodes and opportunities for land use to be created along this corridor. The largest constraint, one of the key ones, we talked about were the support and funding mechanisms in which maybe the city might support private landowners or current landowners to help them realize the full potential of the property, maybe as a temporary situation or as a long-term solution.
Who's your person?
Just in regard to the scope of the study, we're suggesting having 3 phases. The first phase being toward downtown, following Lane up to Wade Avenue, and then from there going from Wade to Atlantic, and then from Atlantic up to 440. We felt that from 440 coming south, it's more of a beautification issue than anything else. And importantly, to tie in the east and west side communities, residential being important because right now they're both completely separated from either side. The flood issue is important. We suggested the river walk on the north side, and we were told that it would be an issue as you're coming more in the middle of the area as the creek switches sides, but that might be an opportunity to solve that problem. Because of the limitation of the railroad tracks and deciding which side the high speed comes on might make more sense to be on the west side and then extend West Street and follow along and then providing access pedestrian probably by overpasses. Would be important. Greenways should probably be closer to the railroad tracks on each side versus coming down closer to Capitol. And then constraints obviously are the railroad tracks, limited access roads, the danger of the access roads that are existing, Peace Street and anywhere else you try to get on or off, as well as we definitely have a constraint with the Wade Avenue, Capital Boulevard entrance exit that definitely needs attention.
I don't have any real surprises on constraints. The typical conversion of infrastructure is really what we talked about a lot. Financial concerns, definitely important, but also the priority and timing of what happens, I think, is a big constraint and opportunity for us. Walkability, transit, everyone wants to be able to walk from one place from downtown up to all the way to the Beltline. But I think the Pigeon House branch is something that we focused on as well. Having some sort of water feature, a focus to downtown, gives an entranceway to downtown, develops residential and then also some sort of commercial to bring the current businesses that are there and then tie it into some new and exciting things. We also talked about the firms that are working pro bono and how cool that is to have them working with downtown Raleigh too.
So on the issue side, we focused mostly on, we started very broad, looking at making the area more appealing as well as more useful. And we looked at that from 3 perspectives mostly. Those were transportation connectivity, the appearance, visual appearance of the corridor, as well as from an environmental perspective regarding flooding and then restoration of some of the wetlands there. We saw plenty of opportunities in the area, and the ones that I'll mention real briefly are using the facility not just as a thoroughfare, but also as a gateway to downtown, making it more visually appealing. Also, from an accessibility standpoint, developing the greenway, which could lead to more multimodal transportation, and then from the land use side of things. We discussed possibly putting in mixed use more on the southern end of things.
Our group, some of the issues that we identified were rezoning the corridor and land use, the inclusion of open space, particularly addressing the concerns of the adjacent residential neighborhoods. Some of the opportunities, we were excited about the Riverwalk, possible transit-oriented development, mixed-use development. We were also discussing importance of access control and connectivity. One of the issues that came up was possibly connecting Six Forks to Capital, and also the importance of the Greenway for multimodal transit. And then the obvious constraints would be floodplain and the tracks and the plans for light rail and high-speed rail.
Our table's top issues were land use as it relates to existing uses in the floodplain and the question about density. Our opportunities were for stream restoration and the Greenway connection, and our constraints were the obvious ones of traffic and money.
Our top issue was a lack of residential access, what we call across the canyon there. And we've got 5 points on one side and Mordecai on the other side, and there's literally no connection between the two. So we'd like to see a nice residential or a nice pedestrian bridge across there that would join to our biggest opportunity, which is the development of the Greenway. That would access the Greenway. I think the biggest constraint is, of course, all the entities working together to make this happen. So you might want to divide the project up into sort of those three major categories.
Our group had a lot of great ideas. Fortunately, they're not going to sound too unfamiliar. The connection to the neighborhoods, pedestrian, bike, and low-speed car traffic, as well as connection over what people have dubbed the valley there. The opportunities we see, in addition to the Greenway, trying to make that a very good feature in terms of like a river walk. We also look at one of the opportunities is the gateway into downtown and improving that and making this a destination. And then our biggest constraint we saw was working with the railroads and finding out where exactly the high-speed rail will go.
We got about 42 points we wanted to touch base on. No, just kidding. A top issue for us was connectivity, and you're hearing the same thing, the access way, whether it's by foot traffic or by vehicular traffic, trying to get back and forth across the roadways. Top opportunity, again, mimicking, will be some form of a river walk program that would take you from north to south, similar to San Antonio. And the top constraint is existing zoning conditions and regulations and land use, which could be addressed by creating a project development funding zone or a TIF zone, tax incremental financing zone.
Our pressing issue was multimodal transportation. We found that this is a great opportunity for get people out of their cars and shop. Come in from the north side of town, get out of their cars, shop at local businesses, maybe even have a farmer's market, and once they're out of their cars, maybe they'd be inclined to jump on some great public transportation and go down to the opera, take a tour of the Capitol building, Glenwood South, whatnot. A major constraint is the reluctance of business owners to improve their businesses and bring businesses that we would like to see. So if we provide the infrastructure for them, maybe that constraint can be overlooked.
Again, very similar. The major constraints were speed of the rail and the road, the impact of the high-speed rail on the surrounding parcels, and also access to the existing uses and proposed uses from the very high-speed corridor. Opportunities are connecting the large connection between the existing neighborhoods and incorporating new development into those neighborhoods along the boulevard, and the Pigeon House corridor as an opportunity for pedestrian circulation and economic development.
We had a very interesting mix of issues like you all did. Our most pressing issue was protecting the greenway, improving the creek, and providing better multimodal access for bike and ped to the greenway from each side of the corridor. The biggest opportunities that we saw were rebuilding the Wake Forest and Atlantic Avenue interchanges and simplifying them, building the greenway, and improving the aesthetics along the Capital Boulevard corridor. The biggest obstacles we saw: money, political will, and too much emphasis on traffic.
Again, I don't think we're going to hear anything new, but some of the issues were the existing zoning, the existing industrial appearance of the corridor, and a lot of residents feel locked in just in terms of limited access across Capital Boulevard. In terms of constraints, which was said before, funding, but also flexibility by state agencies to allow innovation and creativity. In terms of opportunities, we've heard this before, both crosswalks and crossover. And I think to sum it up, someone at the table basically said we want Capital Boulevard to be part of the neighborhood and not just a thoroughfare.
We talked about several issues, but I guess the way that we summed it up was that we wanted to make the area more appealing and more of a destination. Both from an aesthetic point of view and also just for travel, you know, obviously vehicular travel, but also pedestrian travel and bicycles. So that kind of speaks to our opportunity. We talked about the biggest opportunity being the location and making the area a destination for people, somewhere that people want to come to, not just drive through. And the biggest constraint that we identified was just infrastructure and getting that done.
Is that it? Okay, we've covered everyone. That means we're going to get you out of here just a little bit later than we thought. I would like to try to come up with a pithy summary of all those great ideas, but that was some really great work that I think everyone did at the tables. Obviously, a major issue that I think came up over and over again is that this area is a huge barrier between the east and west sides of town, and there needs to be some way to try to bridge across that. And that goes with a lot of the constraints. A lot of the constraints in this area are physical. The rail lines are hard pieces of infrastructure. They're not going anywhere. We have a major transportation corridor that may be modified but isn't going anywhere. So how do we bridge that gap? And I think as a lot of people have identified, it's possible to do it, but it'll probably be fabulously expensive. And if we're going to propose stuff that's fabulously expensive, how are we going to pay for that? And so the funding is a major part of it. Another thing is there's just an enormous amount of moving parts. And I think several of the groups hit upon the fact that if you don't get the phasing right and the timing of what comes first, second, and third, a project of this magnitude is not going to go off. So I think we're going to have an enormous amount of work, thought put into how to reasonably phase a project, how to cobble together a lot of different funding sources from different levels of government, from the public sector, from the private sector, to make some of this stuff happen. But fortunately, there's huge opportunities to make a big difference and in this area. Capital Boulevard is an important road, carries a lot of cars, but it could do a lot more than just carry a lot of cars. And in fact, the number of cars it carries is large, but not an unreasonable number. And the corridor is big, and there's lots of opportunities to start introducing the facilities for transit, for pedestrians, for bicyclists in here, even as we maintain it as a roadway corridor. And then people thought about land use and zoning a lot as a constraint. Well, let me tell you, from the standpoint of this planning project, we're going to be taking a very fresh look at the zoning and the land use patterns here, working with the property owners in the area and trying to come up with some very good ideas. And so that's hopefully not going to be a constraint as part of this as we go forward. Before I let you go, obviously the railroads are a major part of this, and there's two major rail projects proposed for the study area. Triangle Transit regional rail. And there's a meeting, I believe on Monday, the 24th, at the convention, no, today's the 24th, Monday the 28th, at the Convention Center, public meeting hosted by Triangle Transit on the alternatives analysis. Terry, are you still here? Yeah, he's still here. Do I have that right? Okay. And then on, on July 26th, which I believe is a Monday night, also at the Convention Center, is a public hearing on the environmental impact statement for Southeast High-Speed Rail. So, and there's going to be lots of folks out from the project team for that with a lot of information, a lot of maps, and there's going to be an open house portion that starts earlier, and then later in the evening, they're going to be taking comments. They're also taking comments on the document through August by any means you want to submit them, email, letter, etc. So that's another opportunity to learn more about that project. So if you can remember those dates, next week on June 28th, Triangle Transit, and then in about a month on July 26th, Southeast High Speed Rail. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Tricia, I was saying to say, but I'm pretty impressed by the turnout tonight. It's obvious that Capital Boulevard is something that a lot of people care an awful lot about. I want to thank you for taking your time to come out tonight. All those notes are going to get typed up. We're going to read through them all. We're going to read them all again, and a third time to distill what the major points are. We're going to write up a report that summarizes the outcome from tonight, and that's going to be the close of this first phase of the project. Then we're going to move into the inventory. So look back, given the size of the group, maybe in about a month, we'll have that report out there so you can read it, because you took the time to come out and tell us what you thought. We want to make sure that you know that we took the time to listen to everything you had to say and that it was considered as part of this project. So again, thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you. We'll put those dates that Ken just mentioned on our website. And as for the summary report, please, all the note takers, just type up what you can, email it to me. We'll be putting together that summary report. And also the evaluations, if you have a minute before you leave, please fill those out. They help us with future events. And then we also gave you a comment form, so you can take that with you. If you haven't any additional comments tonight and you think of something else, you can add to it. You can always email Ken, email me questions, additional comments, and we'll try to incorporate it. Bobby Murray Chevrolet, thank you again for everything. And they've said to just leave the bottles on the tables and we'll clear those off when you leave. So thank you. Thank you very much.